Religiosity sometimes borders on fanaticism. Is it possible to receive a kind of divine revelation, or is it merely a particularly well-developed intuition? Whatever the case, Faylene was very religious, felt the cold breath of death, and she was not wrong. The area around the city of Phoenix in the U.S. state of Utah is a breathtakingly beautiful place, exuding an atmosphere of calm and serenity. This is where Faen Grant lived, who sincerely believed that she could communicate directly with God. She claimed to hear angels and to have regular visions. She even kept a diary in which she meticulously recorded all these revelations, not realizing what an important role it would play in the future. In the summer of 2001, a man called the emergency hotline asking for help for Faylene Grant. Paramedics arrived on the scene, provided assistance, and took her to a hospital, where she was admitted immediately to intensive care. The only hope was that she would regain consciousness and explain what had really happened, but her vital signs continued to deteriorate. Soon her brain activity ceased. Her husband Doug authorized the withdrawal of life support measures. At 4:37 p.m. on the 27th of September, 2001, 30-year-old Faen Grant was pronounced dead. Doug Grant, Faen's husband, recounted that he woke up that morning and did not find his wife in bed, but heard the sound of water running in the bathroom. Concerned that she had been gone for too long, he decided to see what was going on and found Faylene face down in the water. He pulled her out and carried her into the bedroom, where he tried to revive her until help arrived. The medical examiner concluded that her death was the result of an accident, but the specialist's report indicated that the exact cause was still undetermined. In such a case where murder might be involved, the police have more latitude. The medical examiner found no traces or marks on the body suggesting a struggle or crime, yet the situation seemed so unusual that the police decided to conduct a thorough investigation. When reviewing the circumstances of her death, the officers began to suspect that Faylene's drowning was not accidental. She was described as a devout Mormon from a deeply religious family and extremely devout woman who claimed to have revelations from God. According to her faith, taking one's own life was a terrible sin, and given her strong convictions, suicide seemed inconceivable. However, shortly before her death, she had told a story that God was preparing her for death. For this reason, she took out a life insurance policy, hoping to leave something behind. She also planned her funeral in advance, carefully selecting the course of events and the music. It turned out that Faen had planned her own death in a way, and had even told her husband that, after she died, he should marry a certain woman she had chosen specifically. Her husband spoke with great fondness of his late wife, describing her as loving and very strong. Their love story had begun in 1993, when he met a pretty single mother named Faylene Ives at a fitness studio near Phoenix. At the time, he himself was divorced. Both he and Faylene had gone through failed relationships, and both were Mormons. In fact, Doug and Faylene had known each other since high school, but it was only at the fitness studio that the spark ignited. They began dating, their relationship developed quickly, and 4 months later they married. The couple traveled extensively around the world. Doug remembered those times warmly. They were both well educated, looked after their health through a proper diet and regular workouts, and were members of the Mormon Church leading devout Christian lives. They had 2 boys together and formed a large blended family with 4 children. Yet in the months before her death, Faylene seemed to have delved even deeper into her faith and often behaved oddly, though she had always loved life. Her own decision to leave this world willingly seemed unimaginable. Still, Doug did not consider other options. Many people, who were concerned about this tragedy, worried that her love for religion might be excessive, but Doug believed that was not the case. He insisted her belief in God was moderate. Her devotion to God was constant, but she never stopped being herself and never fell into fanaticism. On the contrary, her faith had always sustained her, and she willingly followed the moral principles laid out in the Holy Scriptures. Doug shared his wife's religious views only to a much lesser degree, being more focused on his business. In the mid-1990s, he managed to start a company selling nutritional supplements, and later he became a sports nutrition consultant. He achieved a lot, even advising NBA teams. He built an entire professional sports network from scratch, which allowed him to earn a good deal of money so that his family lived comfortably and lacked nothing. But Doug also had a Doug side. The well-known man fell for women, and at some point, Faen began to suspect him of infidelity. God confirmed her suspicions, although her husband denied everything. This was a severe blow for Faylene. According to her vision, what had happened was a great sin, but to save their marriage and support the children, she stayed with her husband. Unfortunately, this did not change the situation. God revealed once more that her husband was unfaithful. Her husband finally confessed that he had cheated on her with 6 women, and that was the last straw. On God's advice, Faen filed for divorce in 2001. Despite her resentment, it was a painful and difficult decision because she still loved her husband. According to friends, she cried a lot, almost every night. Yet, for the children's sake, the couple decided to remain in close contact and maintain their relationship. Even so, after the divorce, Faylene had to move out with the children. It is difficult to say whether she was hoping to restore their relationship, but Doug seemed completely fine with the way things were. He soon began a relationship with a 19-year-old beauty queen from Louisiana named Hillary Dweed, who was nearly half his age. Right after his divorce, Doug repeatedly told his friends he would never marry again, but only a few weeks into his relationship with Hillary, he realized he could not live without her. The young employee of his company gladly accepted his advances. Their relationship lasted several months, and Doug was already planning to propose to Hillary. But in August 2001, everything changed. Faylene called her ex-husband, asking him to come for an urgent talk, saying she had experienced a vision in the Mormon temple she had recently visited. God, she claimed, told her that she should remarry Doug. This was a shock for him, but after thinking it over, he listened to her words and spoke of reconciliation and reviving their relationship. After this conversation, Doug called Hillary and admitted he was returning to his ex-wife. At that point, it seemed obvious that his relationship with his lover was over, yet that was only the beginning of the story. Hillary had strong feelings for him and did not want the relationship to end. When the police learned of the circumstances of Finn's death, they developed serious doubts that it was an accident and suspected something far more sinister. The existence of a love triangle gave everyone involved a motive. Investigators decided to take a closer look at the last few months of Faylene's life to understand what could have driven a devout, cheerful Christian woman to end her life. They also considered the possibility that her husband, or even his young lover, might have wanted to get rid of her. They needed solid proof, though, and the motive itself remained questionable. No one was forcing the husband to stay. There was no dispute over property or custody, and there was no financial motive. They had reconciled, so it did not seem that Doug had any reason to want Faylene dead. At this point, he believed she had taken her own life, but he could not explain why. Doug also spoke of the fact that his deeply religious wife had received revelations, maintaining in all seriousness that she truly had the gift of foresight, and he provided the police with valuable information about the diary she had kept for several years. Whatever revelation Finn experienced in the San Diego temple remains a mystery, but afterward, she insisted on renewing her marriage with her husband. Only a few days after this revelation, they were standing in a chapel in Las Vegas, saying their vows again and becoming husband and wife once more. People close to Faen were skeptical of the renewed relationship, but Faylene remained calm, and Doug seemed changed. However, during a phone call after the wedding, Faylene's sister noticed that she never once said she loved him. It appeared the woman considered reuniting for the children's sake, not for her own. This reunion with Doug broke Hillary's heart. Yet, despite these conflicting accounts, events took shape that turned into a strange love triangle, because, as it turned out, Doug did not want to give up his young lover even after remarrying Faylene. They continued to see each other. For journalists covering the story of the deceased woman, every new detail of this tangled relationship was a treat. Faen's diary, in which she recorded her revelations, was especially important. All of it generated enormous public interest and fueled widespread rumors that the deceased's family tried to fight. In her diary, Faen wrote extensively about her visions, her faith, and her family. It was all well written, reminiscent of a mentor's speech. After reuniting with Doug, Faylene sent Hillary many messages on social media and by email. None of them were angry. They resembled parental guidance, as though, at that point, her belief in her impending death had reached its peak. And she now viewed Hillary as Doug's future wife and the stepmother to her children. When investigators checked Hillary's phone records, they found constant calls with Doug. He insisted they were discussing Faen's condition, which everyone found so troubling. However, investigators suspected there was something much worse going on, and they also believed that Faylene was unaware that her husband's affair had never actually ended. At the same time, her diaries were filled with revelations about her death. She did not speak of voluntarily leaving this world, but wrote that relentless fate had shown her a future in which she would no longer be alive. As a devout Mormon, she accepted her fate and seemed resigned to it. One could see similar feelings on her social media. On the 7th of September, she chatted with her sisters and stated that, only 6 days earlier, she had felt the breath of death. Faen was surprised she was still alive. On the 17th of September, she contacted her relatives again, telling them that she would soon be gone and saying her goodbyes. The last month of Faen's life passed with these kinds of revelations, which everyone close to her heard. She even spoke to her physical therapist about it, who advised her not to dwell on such things and to focus on tangible problems. The doctor attributed her behavior to stress, believing that her fatalistic attitude would soon pass. She turned to Hillary, asking her to look after the children if this happened. Following these words, Hillary decided to visit Faylene, trying to figure out the cause of her gloomy thoughts. During this meeting, Faylene insisted that the young lover take her place in Doug's life after she was gone. She asked her to marry him and formally adopt their children. It all sounded strange, and investigators had plenty of questions for the trio. They noticed that all this happened while the newlyweds were planning a second honeymoon. They wanted to visit some of the most sacred sites of the Mormon faith, which had long been a dream of Faylene's. She insisted that now was the time to do it, as there would never be another opportunity. The couple went to the Nauvoo Temple in Illinois, but suddenly Faen herself changed their plans, saying they should visit the Timpanogos Cave in the mountains of Utah. Surprisingly, it was at the edge of a cliff there that Faylene almost died. Standing near the cliff's edge, she looked up and claimed to see an image of Jesus in the clouds. Doug had taken a photo of his wife just seconds earlier and was convinced she was dead. It turned out that, after a fall of about 20 meters, she was not seriously injured, which seemed like a miracle. According to Doug, he realized that surviving such a fall, let alone emerging with no serious wounds, was nearly impossible. He said he was so startled that he had no time to help her or pull her away from the edge of the cliff, and it all happened right before his eyes. He took her to a local hospital, where doctors treated her minor injuries, such as scratches and scrapes. She had no broken bones, only bruises. Even the doctors found it hard to believe she had fallen from a height of 20 meters. However, Faylene insisted on this version of events. The terrain was filled with sharp, jagged rocks, which could easily have caused lacerations and fatal injuries. The devout woman saw this miraculous occurrence as a sign from above, and the police suspected that Doug had somehow orchestrated the entire incident. In light of the diary's references to divine revelations, it seemed that Faylene knew what lay ahead when she traveled with her husband. To her great despair, she merely accepted it as her fate. It was no longer possible to find out how she really felt or why she did not try to prevent it. In questioning, Doug described the morning he found his wife dead. He said that since the fall from the cliff, he had experienced sleep problems and was taking sleeping pills a doctor friend had recommended and prescribed. He claimed he had no idea how his wife could have drowned in the bathtub. The widower stuck to his story that it was an accident, but did not rule out that she might have taken her own life. The prosecution, however, took a completely different view. The authorities and many of the deceased's relatives were convinced it was no accident. Moreover, there were no reliable witnesses for the prosecution to rely on, and only much later did they emerge. Faen's sister called the investigators with important news. An old friend of Doug claimed that Doug had confessed to murdering his wife, allegedly saying that since she was ready to go to heaven, he had simply submerged her in the bathtub until she drowned. But the witness demanded a large sum of money from Faylene's family in exchange for his testimony. The investigators met with the man and persuaded him to participate without compensation, and he agreed. He invited his friend Doug for a talk while wearing a wire. The man did everything he could to get Doug to confess, but Doug never explicitly admitted to anything. Although he was clearly nervous and evasive, it all looked suspicious. In the summer of 2005, the police arrested Doug and charged him with murdering his wife. He posted bail immediately and returned home to await trial. It was not until 7 years after Faen Grant's death that Doug was brought to trial. This was a terrible blow to the victim's entire family, who did not want to revisit the events or relive them in detail. It was especially painful for Faen's brother Jay, who said there had never been a day after her death when he did not think of her. He was certain that the victim would never have taken her own life, and doubted she had drowned by accident. Everyone wanted justice and answers. Even the woman's adult children found it difficult to accept what had happened. The trial lasted 4 months and became a highly publicized case. The media followed the proceedings with great excitement. Many witnesses came forward, reporting various suspicious circumstances before and after the woman's death. For example, Doug's sister Tammy visited the couple's home immediately after the cliff incident. Tammy believed that Faylene had not intended to return from that trip. She said there were notes from Mormon scriptures, bags containing personal items, and instructions on who should receive them. Tammy believed Faylene saw death coming and had jumped off the cliff herself. When Tammy returned to her brother's home after Faylene's death, she noticed even more such messages. To her surprise, she found temple clothing laid out on the couple's bed, items that were deeply significant to the deceased right up to her final days, which she usually never displayed publicly. Tammy's discovery was alarming. She said there were many other objects of religious significance, and the whole thing seemed frightening, as though Faen truly wanted to die and had prepared for it. Disturbing notes were stuck on mirrors, indicating how thoroughly she had accepted her fate, apparently without intending to change or even attempt to avoid it. Considering all this, and the accident in the mountains, some of her relatives began to believe that she had indeed chosen to end her life. From another perspective, her actions did not make much sense. She showed no signs of despair or depression, neither took illegal substances nor drank alcohol, and remained calm to the end. But could Doug really have driven the mother of his own children to death? During the trial, Doug revealed new details, saying that after their trip to Utah and the accidental fall from the cliff, Faylene started believing in a miracle. She said she no longer felt the evil doom that had been hovering over her. Once they were home, she still had some bruising and spent several days sleeping poorly, but she seemed to have recovered her zest for life. Exhausted from all the traveling and hospital visits, Doug just wanted to rest, while his wife could not sleep well. Hoping to help, he contacted his friend, a physician's assistant at the hospital nearby, who came to examine her. The doctor found nothing seriously wrong and felt she just needed rest and time to recover. To ease her discomfort, he gave her an injection for the pain and prescribed her painkillers and a sedative. Then, according to Doug, who was also exhausted, He told his wife that if she could not sleep, she should take the medication prescribed by the doctor. With that, Doug took his sleeping pills and went to bed. The next morning, he found his wife dead. The prosecution insisted that even if he was not directly involved in the drowning, he had acted with criminal negligence. He knew she was in pain, having death visions, and was under the influence of painkillers and sedatives, yet he left her alone and did not help her. Equally suspicious to the prosecution was Doug's behavior after the incident. In statements, he claimed he was the one who called emergency services, although in reality, it was the doctor who had prescribed Faylene's medication. That morning, when Doug found his wife in the bathtub, he pulled her out of the water, placed her on the bed, and started running around the house in a panic, trying to save her. Faylene's oldest daughter, Jenna, witnessed this and went with her younger brothers to the neighbor, the same doctor who had prescribed the medication. The doctor rushed over and called 911 on his way. Doug screamed and pleaded for someone to help Faylene, while the doctor did whatever he could. Doug explained away the investigation's accusation of a false statement by saying he had been confused and in shock over his wife's death. The prosecutors, however, interpreted it as a ploy to hide something worse than mere negligence. A toxicology report confirmed the investigators' suspicions. The victim's blood contained such a high level of sedatives that she definitely would not have been able to move about the house on her own. This supported the theory that her husband had placed her in a tub full of water, depriving her of any chance to get away, so that she drowned while he slept. Upon waking, he began acting out his story. Unexpectedly, investigators located a witness who fully confirmed this version of events, the eldest daughter. She had been in the hallway at the time of her mother's death and believed she saw her stepfather carry her mother into the room and close the door behind him. She had no idea what happened behind that door, did not see her mother being submerged, and initially told the police nothing. Years later, after realizing what had happened, she became determined to obtain justice for her mother, haunted by the guilt that she had done nothing. Doug, for his part, was oblivious to the fact that Jenna was awake early that morning, and he did not realize that her mother was dying just behind the door. The girl later confessed that if she had knocked or gone in, she might have saved Faylene, though she could not have predicted how her stepfather would react to a witness. At trial, the prosecution portrayed Doug as a cold-blooded murderer, violent and potentially dangerous, a depiction that angered the people who had come to support him. They presented his love for Hillary as the motive, arguing that he had attempted to kill his wife at least twice. They held him responsible for the cliff incident, interpreting Faylene's divine revelations in different ways but concluding that her death was no accident. The defense insisted it was a matter of unfortunate coincidences and that the police had been trying from the start to pin the blame on the husband, resulting in a flawed and incomplete investigation. The defense lawyer pointed out the poor quality of several pieces of physical evidence on which the inquiry relied. Much of the collected evidence was lost or destroyed, including clothing and the pills Faylene had taken, all of which was attributed to incompetence among the medical examiners and investigators. Moreover, none of Faen's diary entries had been examined. According to the lawyer, Faylene had recently taken out a new life insurance policy for a considerable sum, but at the time of her death it was not yet in effect, so even if wealthy Doug had needed the money, he would have had to wait to receive it. Also, Faylene was on good terms with Hillary, and the two women seemed to get along, so there was no issue. The defense therefore argued there was no valid motive for murder. The prosecution insisted he was a manipulative abuser who had driven his wife to the brink so that she would appear religiously delusional, making it seem she had ended her own life. From the prosecution's viewpoint, all of her divine revelations revolve around Doug. Even when she foresaw her own death, her husband was there, which they viewed as clear evidence of his involvement in the tragedy. Hillary herself supported Doug in court and argued for his acquittal. She had been greatly influenced by the messages the deceased had sent her shortly before dying, asking Hillary to become Doug's wife and adopt her children. Hillary went along with it. 3 weeks after the tragedy, she married Doug and adopted the children Faylene and Doug had together. Meanwhile, Faylene's 2 children from her first marriage went to live with their biological father. Hillary had a daughter with Doug, and during the first years of their marriage, she had to endure constant judgment from people who truly believed she played a key role in Faylene's death, and that everything in the Grant family's life had gone wrong because of her. Hillary constantly wondered whether the same thing that happened to Doug's first wife could happen to her. She insisted, however, that he never abused her. The prosecution noted that Doug did not seem to behave like a grieving widower after Faylene's death. Only a few hours after the tragedy, he drove to see his lover. When he arrived, he pressed his body against her car, hugged her, and whispered sweet things in her ear. That was clearly not the behavior of a man mourning his wife. It seemed obvious he was relieved by events. In her testimony, Faylene's daughter described her suspicions about Doug. She believed her stepfather had brainwashed her mother into believing she had a divine gift and had to die, so that she would prepare for her own death. She felt he deserved the full weight of the law. But the children Doug had with Faylene supported their father's acquittal. They had already lost their mother and did not want to lose him, too. The prosecution considered various charges, from first-degree murder to second-degree murder or manslaughter, any of which would carry at least a 10-year prison sentence. The jury deliberated for a long time, ultimately finding Doug guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to a term of years in prison. Although that penalty may seem too small, the victim's family still remains uncertain whether he was truly guilty and whether he deserved punishment at all. The controversial case still raises more questions than it answers. Doug was released from prison in 2014. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.